Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. My name is Raul CARUSO, the director of CESPIC, the European Center of Peace Science, Integration and Cooperation. And I'm delighted to start this afternoon with this meeting titled International Order and Instability, USA, European Union and the Balkans. Before going in depth into the details, I would invite Father Daniele BERTOLDI for the welcome address, our President, Our Lady, for the Foundation of Our Lady Good Counsel.
Thank you, Raul. Thank you, the people who will share with us their knowledge about the topic. And I hope that we can become richer and richer by participating to these events, to these moments of formation, which don't bring many people, but surely the people are coming are very interested. Allow me to say something. Oggi, in italiano, oggi è la festa delle forze armate italiane, perché oggi festeggiamo il termine di una guerra che è iniziata nei Balcani, con l'uccisione dell'Arciduca d'Austria a Sarajevo nel 1914. I Balcani sono sempre stata una zona, leggevo nei libri di storia, abbastanza instabile. A parte la guerra che c'era, non si sa mai, tra Russia e Croazia e come si chiama l'altra nazione, l'Ucraina, le altre guerre che sono combattute alla fine del secolo scorso, in questo secolo, sono venute nei Balcani. Vi ricordo la brevissima guerra tra la Slovenia e la Jugoslavia, 2 o 3 giorni. Poi la guerra tra la Croazia e la Serbia, poi la guerra in Bosnia, poi la guerra del Kosovo. È una zona instabile, dove l'Unione Europea e gli USA hanno lavorato e combattuto. Ma la domanda che io mi faccio, chi è che può superare questa instabilità nei Balcani? Se gli abitanti dei Balcani sperano che la soluzione viene dagli USA, continueranno a sperare. È vero che di speranza si può anche morire, però è l'ultima a morire. Se spereranno nell'Unione Europea, sono convinto che continueranno a sperare. La soluzione per i Balcani sta nei Balcani, perché solo la popolazione dei Balcani può trovare degli equilibri. Gli altri possono aiutare. Voi avete fatto come esperienza personale che quando andiamo in crisi e siamo in difficoltà, tutti ci danno consigli, qualcuno ci dà anche degli aiuti, ma alla fine la crisi è mia e io devo trovare la soluzione. Alla fine l'instabilità dei Balcani, se esiste, qualcuno dice di sì, qualcuno dice di no, può essere superata solo se la popolazione dei Balcani può trovare una forza dentro e una forza insieme agli altri. Grazie mille.
Thanks, Father Daniele. Now I'm delighted to give the floor to our Rector Magnificus, Professor Bruno GIARDINA.
Thank you, Raul. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I wish to thank very much Professor Raul CARUSO for the very good work done in organizing this meeting, for the stimulating title given to this conference. A very special thank is due to the Ambassador of Italy, Alberto CUTILLO, who, with his presence, outlines the importance of the topic of the day. A warmest thank to the speakers, Professor Erik from the University of San Diego, Professor RUGGERI from the University of Oxford, and Professor Arben ÇEJKU, Director of Albanian Center of Good Governance, who made possible to organize this event. The title per se and the place in which we are outline the importance of the mission of the university in this time of crisis in the global international society. We, as university, have a fundamental social and political role. Our main goal is to promote all over the world a true dialogue a true respect for cultural diversity, in other words, a true respect of human values. If we wish to maintain a true international equilibrium, and if we wish to fight against instability, we have to understand which kind of mechanisms are at work. What type of mechanism is involved in the maintenance of a good equilibrium in a continuous environmental change? I think that this afternoon, due to the scientific value of our guest, will be a great scientific and human experience. I agree with Father Daniele Bertoldi. He told us, gave us a pragmatic view of the problem. But I think that the real solution of a general problem, instability, is not only located in the Balkans. Instability is a general problem, a worldwide problem. So the solution, I think, is in the culture, is in the university, the school, the high school. So we have a great responsibility, and I think that this kind of event could really play a fundamental role in this respect. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks to Rector Magnificus, Professor Giardina. Let's go. I'll grab only 1 minute of your time because, yes, it's better to give the floor to our guests. As you know, or if you don't know, CESPIC do espouse a comprehensive concept of peace. We start from micro foundation of peace and eventually also to global foundation of peace. And this meeting does reflect this approach in the sense that now we do, here we are going to listen about the global order which is behind peace, even internal peace. So the point is that any kind of outcome in any country depends also and sometimes mainly on what is the global order on the back. And this is particularly crucial for Balkans. Balkans, as you know, is a region which has been defined in the past from a famous political scientist. It's a fault line. No? Samuel Langenthal was used to say, use this statement, the fault line conflicts in Bosnia and Kosovo, where we are on a boundary between. It seems we are on the boundary between different regions, different words, different approaches to political landscape. So I think that in this respect, the scope of this meeting is self-explanatory. Okay, even because we are not in a very clear-cut global order at the moment. We know that there are many things that appear to take shape in the next year. There have been many things which took shape in the latest couple of years. Of course, we don't ignore that the world is not bipolar. It is not any longer bipolar. There is no Cold War. A Cold War was something very clear. There were two major powers. Now we are still waiting for a new order in the world. And the US president, the Russian president, and the Chinese president and other major leaders in the world are working to shape this. What are we going now? Professor Erik GARTZKE from University of California, San Diego, and Professor RUGGERI from Oxford are giving us, I would say, the landscape, okay? And His Excellency Arben ÇEJKU, His Excellency Alberto CUTILLO will give us some regional and European perspective from the field. So I give the floor to Erik. I have to publicly warn Erik for being here. California is not really around the corner. And he gave us the possibility to come to Tirana. So thanks for coming. And it's your time.
Well, thank you, Raul. Thank you, everyone. I'm very grateful to be here. I'm going to start my clock so that I make sure not to impose upon you excessively. This is a layer upon layer of complex subjects, and I want to start by saying that I'm an expert on social processes, political processes, and conflict processes in particular. I'm not an expert on the Balkans, and certainly not about Albania. So everyone, my mother used to have a poster up on her wall. She was a school teacher, and it said, "Everyone is ignorant only on different subjects." I will try to steer clear of as many subjects that I'm ignorant on as possible, but it's conceivable that I will say some things because of limited time or because of my ignorance that aren't fleshed out, aren't clear, or are just incorrect. And I do apologize for that up front. But hopefully what I do, there's some trade-off between brevity and clarity, and hopefully I will lean a little bit towards clarity. Okay. So a little bit of history, and I see right away that I can't read my slides from where I am. I hope you can read some of them. Basically, the point I'm going to try to make here is I'm going to do a little bit of curve fitting, right? One of these is not like the others. How do we decide this new era that we're going into? What's the best example in relatively recent times that we can point to of something that kind of sort of looks like this? And what I came up with was the late Concordant of Europe period, the second half of the 19th century. You got a multipolar system, several great powers. They're all getting along okay, right? No big wars between the big powerful states. And part of the reason they're getting along okay is because there's lots of ways that they can prey on others, okay? Now, this is not exactly the same as the contemporary era, but there's some parallels. So I'm going to use that as my point of departure. So imagine that we are in 1870. I know you can all do that. I'm kidding, right? 1870 was a long time ago. Probably even the older people in this room don't remember 1870. But we're going into a world that's structurally different than a world that any of us have experienced or can remember. And that's the closest example that I could come up with. Maybe you can do better. But there were some features about that world that were distinctive and very different. One of the things that has already come up in comments is the issue of stability. And I'm going to say that stability is easiest when there's one big moving part or two big moving parts. It gets hard when there's 5 big moving parts. So a multipolar world is inherently less stable than a unipolar or bipolar world. And that's an issue of concern already. But it's the world we're going to be in, and we're going to have to figure it out. Okay. A couple of differences, and let me move on from there. The actors in this world do not want the same things as they wanted in the 19th century. I was looking for the quote from my previous president by 2, George Bush, we number our presidents, 43, right? And he said, in a moment of sort of self-glory, when things were looking a little bit better than they did later on, and the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan were looking like they might be successful, he said, the cool thing about the United States is we're not at all like old empires. Old empires came and they conquered and they owned you. We come, we shoot at your houses and blow up your villages, and then we leave, and that's the good part, right? Now, why could that be the case? That's a strange thing to be proud of, but in a way it's not. It's not a character. His claim was that this was a character, a quality of the United States. I'm going to make a different claim. It's a quality of the circumstances in which the United States and many other powerful countries operate today, which is we don't want anybody else's stuff. When the Romans came to visit, they didn't go home, right? They set up camp, literally, and sometimes set up a couple of forts, and they owned you, and they rent-seeked, in modern social science terms, off of the territory that they conquered. The US spent more money supplying potable water to Iraq than we would have made in profits from selling the oil of the entire country. There was no way we were going to profit by owning Iraq. The story about the US invaded for oil is a little bit more complicated than that, but it's not about territory or stuff. Modern, sophisticated societies don't make their money off of land. They make their money off of what's between people's ears, and that's very hard to conquer. You have to use more, in the English American parlance, carrots than sticks. Okay, so one of the big things that's changed is what is at stake, what people are arguing and sometimes fighting over. They always fought over these things. You had wars of religion in the old days, or war of this war of Spanish succession, for example. But we're not going to fight over territory in the modern world that much. We may be fighting in territory, but not over territory. And that's a big difference. Okay, so how does that shape things? How does that matter? It's going to make the kinds of competitions and contests different. When the US looks abroad, it's not looking at places it covets to own. It's looking at policies it covets to own. It wants to shape the foreign policies or domestic policies of other societies in ways that are more consistent with their preferences. And this is what other powerful actors are doing as well. Okay. A couple of constraints, some good ones and some bad ones. We don't normally think about nuclear weapons as a good thing, but they have effectively made major war among great powers a thing of the past. And I'm going to make that claim because I'll only be wrong once. Okay? If there's a global nuclear war, I'll have to say, oops, but nobody will remind me for very long because we'll all be history, right? For the most part, countries with nuclear weapons are reluctantly to confront each other in a major, dramatic, frontal way, which means they're constantly maneuvering on each other, okay? The most important thing to understand about history and security and stability is that we don't get rid of things, we just reshape them a little bit, okay? If you are uncomfortable with the way your body looks and you wear a girdle, you're not skinnier. You're just pushing the things around a little bit and pretending that it's thinner in some spot. Security is going to do the same thing. Nuclear weapons make it very hard for powerful actors to confront one another in major war the way we did too often in this 20th century. But ironically, it makes it easier to poke at each other. And the extreme form of this is in the cyber domain, where, in effect, we have a continuous conflictual engagement between capable actors of the world, and this is probably a normal thing that will continue now indefinitely. The other thing that's shaping the world in a good way, not just directly in terms of making the world richer, but also making it more furtive about the use of force, is economic development. Now, we're not talking about this making people nice. We're talking about making people careful And one of the illustrations of this is when the Russian Buk missile system shot down the Malaysian Airlines flight a couple of years ago, the Russians denied that they were involved. The fact-finding has been done, and I'm going to say the Russians were involved. But immediately after this, they removed a lot of that hardware from the battlefield, making it harder for their side to do well. And one of the reasons they did this, I think, was they were afraid of souring relations with the West so much that they would lose their ability to engage in the markets that are profitable and that they need. Okay, so it's not that disputes won't happen, but we're always going to be, I should say, we're usually, when we fight, we're going to be fighting with one hand tied behind our back. Okay, so the good thing about that is we probably won't have big wars like in World War I and World War II. The bad thing about this is we'll probably be poking at each other on somebody else's territory or in somebody else's virtual domain almost always. And guess what? The Balkans have always been a convenient place to do this kind of thing. They're going to continue to be so. All right. Restraint. The current resident of the White House in the United States is an advocate of restraint, and I happen to be an advocate of restraint too. Now, this means different things to different people. It's like being an advocate of peace. Most people say, yes, I'm an advocate of peace, but when you get down to the details, they may not agree. Okay. The way I think to think about this is that the United States in the 1990s and in the aughts was a kid in the candy store. It had unprecedented power in relation to the rest of the world. It could do just about anything it wanted, and many things that it didn't want that much. It tried a lot of stuff. It did a lot of things. Today, what we have to do is ask ourselves tougher questions about whether that's a good idea or not, whether it's in the interest of the United States and whether it's in the interest, perhaps, of other parties as well. And more often, the United States is going to end up deciding that they'll take a pass on that one, right? So what does this mean from the other side? It means convincing the United States that it has an interest. And I'm sorry about this. I mean, I'm in European soil making a pitch that I think many Europeans will find distasteful, because from the perspective of many Europeans, the United States has too much discretion in the world, doesn't think about others enough, and so on. And that's all true. I completely accept that. It's not going to get better. The way that the United States will engage in world affairs is it will do what it sees as its principal interest, and occasionally it'll do a few other things when somebody does a really good marketing job of convincing them that, hey, this is a special case, you should care about us, and here's why. And so the winners in those secondary games that are going to be the main show, in effect, in world affairs, the winners are going to be the ones that do a good job of representing themselves in Washington and convincing Washington that, hey, this is one of those that we shouldn't take a pass on. Okay. Last thought, this guy has done a great job of marketing. He's convinced the world that Russia is a very powerful and capable country. And the truth is, and I've got a whole bunch of slides to show this, but just for the sake of argument, let me tell you, he is not. Okay, final notes. The big game that the United States is concerned about in the future, which other countries in Europe, well, countries in Europe cannot help with very much, is China. Full stop. Look at the national security policy documents that have come out in the last 2 years from Washington. This is not going to change. Trump will be gone in a couple of years, and we'll get somebody who's a little bit less colorful, maybe a little bit more helpful in some ways, but this is not going to change. Any country in the world that wants attention in Washington has to pitch it against the growing concern about China, and that concern has real roots. It is not going to go away. So in influencing the still most powerful country in the world, the pitch is, here's why we're also something to do, as opposed to, you know, you should care about us. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Erik. Presenting Erik, I have been guilty in the sense that I didn't say that something that you realized. You realized that Erik GARTZKE is one of the top scientists in political science in the world, because in a very short time he gave us a so comprehensive picture. And before proceeding, I would like to highlight 3 words he mentioned. The first was instability and stability, that basically was one of the topics here. The second word is interest. He highlighted that foreign policy of a major power like US is dictated by US interest. Okay? And third, something that if I'd said the same, you wouldn't have believed me. But he's from US. He's spent a lot of time in Washington. And you know, many people in Washington, right? And the biggest concern of the US is not Europe, it's not Balkans, it's China. Okay? And this is something which is always on the background, but we cannot forget this. So, thanks, Erik, for so comprehensive. And now it's time for Andrea Ruggeri. Andrea Ruggeri is from University of Oxford, and is Italian, but has been working in UK for years now. And what else? He's also consulting with the Foreign Office from time to time. So, Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First, let me thank Father Bertoldi, Professor GIARDINA, for an invitation, introduction, and my friend Raul CARUSO for inviting me. So, being an Italian, I've been for 15 years abroad, but I have to stand up and maybe move my hands, okay? So that's something I didn't lose. So, and I know there is a camera there, so I'm gonna stay here. So, I'm also very happy to be in Tirana, by the way. First time in Tirana. I belong to the generation who saw the boats arriving in Italy. I'm a generation that grew up playing football with Albanian kids. So, I'm not gonna talk about stability, in the sense that I published recently a piece with NATO, and it's forthcoming also in Italian with a new piece by CESPIC this year, and because stability actually is a hard concept, but I'm going to talk about multilateralism. My work is mostly about peacekeeping and peace operation. I know that there is a lot of skepticism about if peacekeeping works or not. I'm going to try to make a strong point about multilateralism. Also because I believe that the major narrative nowadays is that multilateralism doesn't work. If we look at basically the position of the US president, if we look at the Prime Minister of Great Britain, but also Macron, for a certain extent, multilateralism is not the way to go. So I'm going to try to make a couple of points, and clearly I'm trying to struggle with the realist, some of them say the pragmatist, so the people that look at politics say, well, you know, multilateralism is something that cannot exist. I'm going to try to say what is and why multilateralism, cooperation as a cause of multilateralism or as a product, because many people will claim that actually when we see cooperation, it's not thanks to multilateralism, but just because people are cooperating. Then a central concept that is the loss of sovereignty, whether actually if we want to be part of an institution like the European Union or the United Nations, we are losing sovereignty, and whether multilateralism can fail, and actually, do we need an hegemon or leaders for multilateralism, or there is no necessity? So Father Bertoldi was talking about citizens. I'm going to also talk about leaders. So one of the major issues about multilateralism is the coordination among many states. So usually it's very easy, and also, you know, Erik was making the point about the bipolar system, but one of the problems is that how can you cope when there are very different states with similar powers but different interests? Well, one way is actually to coordinate through rules and institutions. And that's something that maybe you perceive as given, the European Union, the UN, NATO, but those have been institutions that have been providing actually framework to also have better coordination, but also overcoming two major problems. One is the mistrust that is not just between us as individuals, but is between states, and the misinformation. The fact that we cannot get enough information about what the other want to do, so one way to resolve it or mitigate that is trying actually to coordinate within an institution. I'm making a point that of course is very related to the concept of liberal democracy, that actually I believe that mediation, dialogue, and compromise are central method in multilateralism. So my point is that multilateralism is based in a constitutional term on the idea of not just mediation. That means finding something that is interesting for both of us, but compromise. That means that sometimes I can actually be a loser, but I will not be a sore loser, because next time maybe I will gain. And this is something we forget too often. The multilateralism actually, on the short term, could be painful, but on long term, will have some payoff. So, of course, people skeptical here will say, you know, actually, you just hanging with friends. So, European Union, NATO, and the World Bank is just that, you know, people have similar preferences, and therefore, they were already cooperating before the multilateralism. But actually, there are many points to say that you make friends, or you strengthen the friendship with your other states, hanging with them. And you know, it's true there is a huge heterogeneity, diversity between institutions. When I say multilateralism, in your mind you have the World Bank, that is extremely different from the European Union and different from NATO. But the idea is that actually, and I'm mentioning Karl Deutsch, who was a German, but studying in teaching in the US, who was talking about security community. He didn't talk about security alliances, that's it. He was talking about communities, the idea that actually, eventually, cooperation becomes the only game in town. What does it mean? It means that war or conflict is not an option. And I know that a few years ago, the European Union got the Nobel Prize, and plenty of people, you know, make fun of it. But I believe that the generation of my grandfather, for instance, was quite amused by the success of the European Union. And it's clear that we are losing the history, the memory of what was Europe before the European Union. Of course, sometimes countries like United Kingdom can think that actually cooperation on being part of multilateralism is not the only game in town. One thing, as an Italian living in the UK, I can say you that clearly this has polarized the British society. And clearly this is becoming a very salient issue and apparently almost impossible to resolve. And we will see in January what will happen. So, sovereignty. Sovereignty is a central concept in international relations. It's a concept that changed dramatically the way states behave with each other, in the sense that the government has the right to organize the population, and other states have not the right to enter in the affairs of this government. Has been changing a lot, and we forget responsibility to protect, for instance, from the United Nations that changed this concept of sovereignty. But many people are talking about taking back control nowadays. Someone declining as making a country great again, someone wants the control back, someone would like to exit the European Union or some form of multilateralism. But this is a fallacy, thinking the sovereignty is a constant concept in history. A few weeks ago, I had the honor to have Federica Mogherini, the still Vice President of the European Commission in Oxford, and she started to actually make this point. Is it possible a form of sovereignty within multilateralism? And is this form of sovereignty maybe more fruitful than the national sovereignty? Or perhaps some countries cannot be sovereign without multilateralism. Can a country like Italy, and be Italian, I can make jokes of Italy, be sovereign not being part of the European Union? That's a big question. As GARTZKE showed, China is going to be the next big challenge. In terms of capability and population, Italy is just a fraction of what is China. So there are global powers, some that are declining, and some are emerging, and many theories of international relations tell us that this is the most dangerous moment, where we don't really know who is the boss in town. And in this moment, actually, multilateralism could be one of the ways to keep our community, as I was saying, safer. Can multilateralism fail? Yes, it does. The League of Nations failed dramatically. One of the most beautiful books, though I could disagree, is the 20 years crisis by Carr, looking at actually those years where the liberals or the utopians, they were thinking the League of Nations could fix everything. There are collective action problems. What does it mean? It means that why, if the US can pay our bill, we have to chip in? Put it in a very straightforward way. And therefore, eventually someone can say, I'm going to stop to pay the bill. And this is the narrative of President Trump. So what are you going to do, European, if I stop paying the bill for NATO? There is also a very important point, response delay. If you remember, I said that multilateralism is about mediation, compromise. It means it takes time. What does it mean? It means that actually it can create resentment. And it's just a week ago that European Union clearly took a wrong decision facing North Macedonia and Albania. It was a mistake. Many politicians said it was a mistake. Many political scientists say that it's a mistake. But that doesn't mean that the long-term game is not a more integration toward the Balkans. It means that now, and then if you want, then we can elaborate, for some internal politics in countries and the European Union, this has been the outcome. Why it can fail also? It can fail because if there are few laws, I don't know if there are laws in politics, but one law that is very important, and was GIARDINA writing about Florence, he said, politics does not tolerate void. If the European Union or another organization is not acting, someone else will do. Russia will step in. China will step in. And you can speak, for instance, we talk about the Balkans, I work more on Africa. Clearly, China is entering all the void, all the political spaces in Africa. Where, by the way, the European Union and some form of multilateralism are very slow to make decisions, and therefore, African prime ministers have to focus on Chinese help. Do we need an hegemon or leaders? Well, this is one of the crucial paradoxes. Can the European Union, can NATO, can the UN exist without an hegemon such as the USA? We don't know, of course, we don't have data, we don't have counterfactual, but it seems that actually, given the logic of collective action I was telling you, can be very hard. Is the European Union an exception? In the sense that the European Union has managed to create a new form of governance. However, some will say, under the shade of the USA. So I have to say that one of the major points that the crisis is showing us nowadays is the role of individual agency. So maybe I'm going back to Father Bertoldi, where he was saying that it can be the structure, but we can see that when times are very difficult, the leader and the decision of the leaders can make a difference. So, wrapping up, there is a mutating nature of sovereignty, and perhaps it could be misleading to think about multilateralism as a shortcoming, as a problem in giving up sovereignty. It's important to shape our time horizons. If we think just at the next electoral cycle, if we think about the budget here, perhaps multilateralism doesn't work. We have to manage the failures and the resentments about the incapacity to deliver by multilateralism. The European Union has failed a lot recently, has been focusing on austerity and fiscal capacity instead, for instance, external relationships. It's not completely true, though, because the new paper of the European Union on the new geopolitics presented by Mogherini actually had a vision. And luckily, it was presented the very day of Brexit, of the referendum outcome of Brexit, and luckily, clearly, European Union and Commissioner and governments were more interested in two very important issues that were austerity and financial crisis. The last very important point is actually forging future leaders. If in crisis agency individuals matter, it means that we have to think systematically how to provide future leaders for this crisis. And of course, then the ball is to you to study and be prepared for the future challenges. I'm going to stop here.
Thanks, Andrea. Oh, very good, Andrea. I didn't remember you were so good, you know. We are good. Oh, I think, Andrea, I would start just to highlight the last word you mentioned about forging future leaders. It's needless to say. I mean, it's what the Rector, Bruno, Professor GIARDINA said at the beginning. We are a university here. We are in a university, and the role of university is to shape the future by forging the leaders of tomorrow. That means you, okay? It's something that we are trying to do, and so the scope of this meeting is also this one. But would like also to highlight another point that Andrea raised is about the mistake made by the European Union not opening the talks with Albania or Macedonia. That is a signal that multilateralism is at risk. Why? Because he said very effectively something, the vision, the word vision. EU at the moment has no shared vision in the long term. We had in the past, it's really the case that we don't have it anymore. And this is something that long term is something which is a problem for many democracies, because policymakers try to build up consensus in the very short run. This is something that democracies elites have to think about, because otherwise multilateralism is the first thing that is going to collapse. But now I spoke too much. I give the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Arben ÇEJKU. Arben ÇEJKU is currently the director of Albanian Center of Good Governance, but he has served as ambassador as Albanian ambassador in Kosovo and in Macedonia a few years ago. And please, the floor is yours.
Yes. Good evening to everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to be here in this very interesting panel. I'm honored to be with two professors and His Excellency CUTILLO here. And thank you very much, Father Bertoldi and Bruno, GIARDINA, and also a special thing to you, my friend Raul, who was the first person to contact me, invite to be part of this forum to talk about the international order and instability, visa stability, because they are so close connected. And as was hearing my friends from US and Italy, I thought that we have to think globally, but my duty now is to speak locally. So this part of the world, this small part of the Europe called Balkans, it was also in terms of the stability and instability was source of two wars and also a source of the inter-ethnic war in the 90s. So it is a very specific and important issue to be addressed even in this honored panel. I thought to talk about a little bit about the Albanian neighborhood because time to time we are talking about Albania, and but we forget that when we are talking about the Albanians' role in the Western Balkans, that they're still the Albanian neighborhood. the Albanians where they live in the countries surrounded by the countries which are surrounding Albania. In Kosovo, for example, North Macedonia, I'm not going to make any mistake with the new name of Macedonia, and also with Montenegro. So we have to keep in mind this specific feature on the state like Albania, which is surrounded by Albanians. This is by history, but talking for the future, we have to count this into consideration as a key factor for the stability in the region. In my opinion, this Albanian neighborhood, and for the first time I hear this sentence in the publicly from a US professor from Columbia University who came in Albania, and he tried to organize a big conference among the universities in Albania, in Kosovo, in Northern Macedonia, and even in part of in Montenegro. So all this was called Albanian neighborhood in frame of the cooperation in the education fields, in the cultural fields. So, and I was provoked to think also in the political point of view and geopolitical point of view, what means this Albanian neighborhood, and who is taking this really into consideration, and what is specific for this Albanians spread by different borders, but united from some of challenges which are in the place. Most Albanians tend to think that history has not always treated them rightly, but still most of them to look towards the future and not towards the past. And they gave a huge contribution for the stability of the region. But this stability, as our colleagues said before, is always under pressure from other key factors, more than the region, in the regional perspective, beyond the European capacity, talking for China, talking for Russia, and also talking for the US. And this region is always provoked by instability from inter-ethnic incidents and from the inter-political tensions, and also from the other influences. And when we are talking about the influences, we count also the Russian influence, which is more present in Serbia with economic and military investments, but also in some other parts of the Western Balkans. We are talking for China, which is coming closer and closer to, not to only to the Albanian neighborhood, but also to Albania. And I was reading the news today that the 5G is coming from China to Albania. We have our international airport, which is handled by a Chinese company, but also nobody knows for sure is Chinese company or whatever is what is behind. So talking for the stability, we have to think about security. And security is connected with the cooperation among Albanians, but also between Albanians and the Balkan states with the rest of the world. Here was mentioned the EU perspective, but now we are on the days where Albanians, the most pro-European people in Albania, but also in Kosovo, in Macedonia, they wasn't full supporter for any kind of reform to join the EU membership. But today we are hearing for the new strategies, and this is an effect. This is an indirect touch to the Albanians, and they are thinking now what is their future. We have Albanians in Kosovo isolated, the only people in the Western Balkan which is isolated, and they can't leave the country without any visa, only to the Turkey. And when we are talking for the Turkish influence on Kosovo, then we have to take into consideration the Kosovo relationship with EU regarding the visa liberalization and Kosovo relationship with Turkey in terms of the visa liberalization. So they are free to move to Turkey and they are stopped to move to EU. So, but during this period of time, Albanians have played a huge role for the stability of the Western Balkans. Are many examples, but I'm reminding some of them. For example, early in the beginning of 90s, the Northern Macedonia, at this time, Fyrom, they declared their independence, but Albania was the first country to recognize this independence and they offered their support. Also, Albanians in Montenegro, they vote for the referendum to reach the 55% of the turnover of the vote to get this independence. Also, our Albanians in Macedonia, in the last referendum for the reconciliation agreement with Greece, and their vote was very important. And they played a key factor in the stability of the Macedonia and the perspective of Macedonia to be a NATO member. Also, Albania have shown his good example. Doesn't matter who was in the power, but Albania as a state have remained an excellent diplomatic relationship with Kosovo, with Northern Macedonia, and with Montenegro. That means that Albania is seriously interested to have a good perspective of this region and to avoid such of ideas for so-called Greater Albania or other alternatives which are not in place. But as a nation, sorry, I'm checking my time because it goes fast. So there are a lot of internal challenges in Albania, in Kosovo, in Macedonia, and these challenges more than less are the same. Some of them are fragile democratic institutions, problems with justice and the rule of law, problems with integrity of the electoral processes, lack of internal democracy in political parties, impunity of corruption at high level, politicization of public administration, lack of economic freedom and increasing monopolies, less opportunities for small and medium-sized enterprises, increasing immigration, the emergency of the authoritarianism as a model of political leadership, and the lack of trade unionism or syndicalism in the country. More than less, the same challenges, internal challenges, are for Kosovo, for Northern Macedonia, even for Montenegro, which means doesn't matter where Albanians are living, but this part of the Balkan have the same challenges. And also Kosovo now have some other specific issues. When we come to every country, we have some specific internal challenges. And for Kosovo, of course, nowadays is the creating a new stable and sustainable new government, which will be faced with a lot of other challenges regarding the dialogue with Serbia and the other issues. But from point of the external challenges, we have a lot of them, but mainly I'm talking about the Russian and Chinese presence in Albania, strengthening of the network of organized crime among the Albania and the region also, and is becoming a very sensitive challenge, the position with the Mujahideen or MEK presence in Albania, and nobody knows how will be the future, because we know now, speaking globally, that the Iran is put it as a country in a new position with this sensitive issue. I will stop here, and if there is any question, because the rest of my document will share with your institute, Raul. Thank you very much.
Thanks to Arben ÇEJKU. I think that even in this case, I would highlight a couple of words. I think that one word already mentioned by Andrea, but stressed by Arben ÇEJKU, has been the acronym NATO. Okay, that's when we speak about security, the NATO membership of Albania and the prospective membership of Northern Macedonia really remarks a boundary, and especially when he mentioned Russia and China. It's something that sometimes is under the role of this membership, sometimes here appears to be underestimated, but it's crucial. It's been crucial for Europe, it must be crucial for Albania now. But now it's time to go ahead, and it's time to give the floor to His Excellency, Italian Ambassador Alberto CUTILLO. I have to thank him warmly, because I knew he has several commitments today, especially because there is a celebration mentioned by Father Bertoldi here in Italy, so there are some meetings he has to attend. So thanks twice, thrice, 4 times for being here, and I give you the floor. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Caruso, for inviting me to join this prestigious panel. I'm not a scholar, and I will speak not as a diplomat tonight, but I just would like to share my own views on the topics you gave me. Perhaps a preliminary remark or two. My intervention is mostly focused on Albania, so I will try from time to time to talk about the Balkans as a whole, but mostly I'll be talking about Albania. And then just to note that the title of my presentation, which probably could be Italian and European Search for Stability in Albania or in the Balkans, could be read also the other way around. Balkans, or better, Albanian Search for Stability from or within Italy and the EU. And the underlying concept of my remarks is in fact that since Skanderbeg's times, Albania has looked at foreign powers as major guarantors of its own survival as an independent nation, for its territorial integrity and stability. Except for the period between 1944 and 1990, Italy has been in fact the main provider of security for Albania. More recently, I would say in the 21st century, the role traditionally played by Italy has been replaced, or rather accompanied, by a number of other states, and particularly multilateral organizations. Some of them have been already mentioned, like NATO, the European Union, of course. However, I will try to demonstrate that still today, Italy's role remains crucial for the stability of Albania. I will briefly cover 3 parts, an historic excursion up to the 1990. Then I will focus on the decade, the first decade of Albania, restore democracy between 1990 and 2000, and then I will ask the question about EU integration. Is it for real, or is sort of myth for Albania? Now, for the first part, I would say that Albania, and in this case I can refer to the Balkans, have been crucial for Europe's stability for many centuries. In fact, it has been already said, I think it could be described, the Balkans, as a sort of Chinese wall which protected the rest of Europe, particularly from the Ottomans' penetration. And even at the time of Skanderbeg, his resistance to the Sultan invasion was financed and supported militarily by European and particularly Italian powers, precisely out of the interest to block, let's say, the invasion here instead of in Italy or in the heart of Europe. With the weakening of the Ottoman empires, the Balkans became again a security issue because under the pressure of independentist movements in the area, the interest of some European powers were threatened. I refer particularly to Italy and the Austrian Empire, who competed at that time for control of the Adriatic Sea. And even Albania had a difficult birth because all its neighbors had ambition to its territory. And in fact, when Albania proclaimed independence in 1912, it was only thanks to the great powers of the time, Austria, France, Germany, Italy, Russia, and the British Empire, that this was recognized, its borders were defined, and its independence was protected from its neighbors. Then World War I reshaped somehow the plans, but still after the war, the situation remained the same. And Italy, with the disintegration of the Austrian Empire, remained the only main powers taking strong interest in Albania, up to the point which I think we can talk about of a de facto protectorate on Albania, despite King Zog efforts to retain a certain level of independence. The relationship was marked by ups and downs, and finally, as we all know, it reached its dramatic epilogue on April 7, 1939, with the Italian invasion and subsequent unification of the two crowns under King Victor Emmanuel. But what is clear, I hope, from this brief historic, let's say, recollection, is this geostrategic importance for Italy to control Albania, either directly or through a cooperative relation. Italy invested considerable political, military, and financial resources, certainly much larger than the benefits they generated. At the same time, I go back to my first remark, it was crucial also for Albania to have this kind of protector to provide security from the many external enemies. And despite its hardly masked imperial ambition, Italy was the best candidate to play this role. The Italian defeat in World War II, and even more the establishment of in Albania of a communist regime adhering to the bloc led by the Soviet Union, created the iron curtain between the waters in the Adriatic and Ionian seas, and seemed to get rid once and for all of this mutual dependence between the two countries. However, despite all odds, Rome and Tirana managed to reestablish some sort of cooperation, even during Enver Hoxha regimes. As recent research highlights, this was true not only after the breakup of the Sino-Albanian friendship, which led to an open détente between Italy and Albania, but also, at least to a certain extent, during the period from 1949, when diplomatic relations were reestablished, and 1980. If you allow me, I would like to mention in this regard two recently published collections of essays which cover this period of time, called Una pace necessaria e gli anni della distensione, edited by Paolo Rago and published by La Terza in Italy under the auspices of the Italian Embassy. And the Albanian edition of the first book will be presented at the Tirana Book Fair next week. So the normalization of relation between Tirana and Rome in the 80s of last century encouraged Italy to devise an ambitious effort to stabilize the entire Western Balkan regions, which was called the Adriatic Initiative. It was focused on both Albania and Yugoslavia, but ironically at the very moment when Albania joined this initiative, November 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, and it marked the beginning of the end of the Cold War, setting in motion a process which led to the dissolution of Yugoslavia and therefore the collapse of this initiative. History then took a different course. Now coming to the following period, the transition in Albania was marked by collapse of economy and mass migration. The economic situation in Albania was already deteriorating in the last years of the dictatorship. It is estimated that around 1990, Albania was the third poorest country in the world in terms of per capita GDP. The end of state economy without its effective replacement by a market economy worsened the situation, to the point that in 1991, Albania faced famine. The international community was not prepared for such an event and such a massive crisis. Those burdens fell mainly on Italian shoulders. Italy set up in summer 1991 Operation Pelican, a complex multidimensional plan involving massive logistical and financial assistance, including military presence to deliver aid. Pelican lasted more than 2 years, until up to December 1993, and somehow managed to save many lives in the country. The Italian military left Albania only to return 3.5 years later, under Operation Alba this time. The nature of the crisis was both political and economic, following the civil unrest prompted by the disruption of the so-called financial pyramids. Again, Italy took a leading role both in brokering the political agreement among parties and which allowed the formation of a transitional government, but also in providing the security framework needed to implement it by deploying an Italian-led military operation under the auspices of the UN Security Council, NATO, OSCE, and the EU. And again, the operation was a success, and without any major accident, the Albania people can resume its complete path toward democracy. As for mass migration, it was largely a consequence of the poor economic perspective and political instability. It is known that Greece and Italy received the bulk of the Albanian migration. Perhaps just to say shortly that this migration did not only produce negative effect in terms of reducing the human capital in Albania, but also some positive effect in terms of creating a circular movement, because many of those immigrants came back to Albania having learned a job or business skills to put into practice. So to sum up, in this crucial period between mostly 1990 to 2000, Albanian institutions and citizens managed to overcome the difficult transition largely thanks to international assistance in several dimensions: security, humanitarian relief, economic support, and migration. In all these areas, Italy played a leading role. And now let's come to the last 20 years. The wars in Yugoslavia, which have been mentioned, were a stark reminder for Europeans of the paramount importance of stabilizing the region. For Albania, as for other countries of the Western Balkans, the way ahead was clearly Euro-Atlantic integration. The results in this perspective are quite mixed. Albania, on one hand, has become a NATO member quite early, in 2009. Joining the alliance is for Albania its most remarkable foreign policy achievement ever. It represents the strongest and, if you allow me, the cheapest answer to its quest for security from foreign enemies, which has loomed over Albania during its entire history since independence. On the other hand, its European integration has been dragging more than expected. This might sound even as an euphemism in the wake of the recent European Council decision, which has been mentioned, to postpone opening of accession negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia. But still, looking in a wider perspective, Albania has made some important steps in its preliminary stages of EU integration. Just to recall the main milestones: stabilization and accession agreement in 2009, lifting of visa regime in 2010, candidate status recognition in 2014. In addition, let me stress also that Albania already enjoys substantial EU funding known as IPA, Instrument of Pre-Accession Assistance, and participates into a number of European Union mechanisms ranging from education, the so-called Erasmus+, to law and order. Just in the last 12 months, Albania signed cooperation agreement with 3 European institutions in this area, Europol, Frontex, and Eurojust. Nevertheless, 16 years after the Thessaloniki summit, June 2003, which stated the future of the Western Balkans is within the EU, proper accession for Albania and for most of the other Western Balkan countries is lagging behind. This is the result of both internal and European factors. At the domestic level, despite almost unanimous support for the EU integration and the lack of other major divisive views between the population in terms of religion, race, ideals, the country has not been able to mobilize its resources to reach that goal. On the contrary, political life has been and remains extremely polarized, absorbing most of the energy to attack political foes rather than to build consensus on critical reforms. At the EU level, the famous enlargement fatigue has largely cooled down enthusiasm over receiving new member states, combined with disappointment not only over EU recent enlargement, but also over EU response to crises of different nature. More recently, some of the EU member states have proposed to suspend further expansion of the membership until profound reform of the EU is completed. The risk of this approach is to generate a strong disillusion with the EU in the region, exposing it to growing influence from external parties who have not only a different agenda, but might be moved precisely by the aim of creating troubles to the EU in the region and more broadly. In addition, EU withdrawal might create in the Western Balkans a strong disincentive to enact profound reforms that are in any case needed to reinforce the still fragile societies and institutions, and rely instead on economic cooperation with partners who might pursue legitimate egoistic interests rather than a genuine interest in the modernization of the region. Among EU members who do not share this view, Italy is probably the strongest and more vocal. Italy has invested heavily in Albania in the last 30 years, as I mentioned already. It is also its main economic partner, accounting for 50% of Albanian export and 30% of Albanian imports. Italian businesses in Albania are among the main national employers. Italian universities host 10,000 Albanian students, most of them benefiting from scholarships granted by the Italian authorities. And also at the political level, let me remind that Italy is the only G7 country whose leaders have been regularly visiting Tirana over the last 30 years. Finally, in terms of the rule of law support, Italy is still present in Albania, despite with a downsized presence, but still operates through Guardia di Finanza 2 bases in Durrës and Vlora, and since 2013, the most effective operation against drug cultivation, namely the anti-cannabis overflights, are run by the Italian forces. All these efforts are not meant to last forever, nor are they paving the way for a new Italian invasion, I can reassure you on this. They represent, on the contrary, Italy's support to Albania's European integration path. We believe that this is the only viable option to secure prosperity and stability to the region. Opening of negotiation represents only the start of a process which is by itself a unique tool to enact difficult reforms. By denying this perspective, Europe put at risk not only security in the Balkans, but in its own territory. And as has been said, and to repeat the words used also by the Italian Prime Minister, Giuseppe Conte, it would be an historic mistake. I can only hope this mistake will be addressed, the sooner the better. Thank you.
Thanks a lot to Mr. Cutillo. Even in this case, I would like to highlight one word I liked in particular before going the floor to the questions, is the word he used, disillusion. Disillusion about EU integration in the future. I mean, I like this word because sometimes politics is not all about realpolitik or about agreement or about trade or about foreign investment. Disillusion recalls that politics also sometimes a matter of perception, matter of emotions, a matter of vision, a word used before, vision, shared vision. And I hope that this word, disillusion, won't take shape in the near future in this country. And we hope to contribute, as a university, we hope to contribute not to make this real, make it concrete. So thanks a lot for using this word, also for remembering that there is an inevitable friendship relationship with Italy in this country. So I think we have, in spite of the heavy rain, we also listen to heavy rain coming down. We have some short time for questions. So I invite you to come here to introduce yourself, make some quick questions, and to our guests, and that's it. So, who wants to come first? I hope that the few students left who didn't left ask questions. Don't be shy, because it doesn't happen every day to. Aren't there any questions? Yes, please come in. Come here. Yeah, come here. Don't be shy. Introduce yourself.
Okay, so I'm Clark. I didn't want to start first, but unluckily I will. So the question stands for the relation that Albania has with the other countries. So I'm just making a point, like I will refer to 3 countries, like there aren't only 3, but I will refer to like USA, taking the European Union as just one country, a mistake, I'm taking it by my fault, and the Turkey. Well, I'm seeing that the Turkey has been investing and is going still to invest in Albania. I'm still seeing that even though that the European Union neglected, I would refer, to that, like that, neglected the Albanian question if they could enter the European Union or not, or maybe they just responded like not yet. And also to the USA responsibility that has over Albania. So let's say, what is these countries' role for Albania, like their importance, and should we divide their importance for Albania, or should we take Albania just as a guest, or let's say that Albania is just using their sources, their investments? So Turkey is still important for Albania and they have a good relation. USA is still important for Albania and they have a good relation, and the European Union has a good relation too. So where's the deal? Is there anything wrong, or it's just a normal situation?
Thanks a lot. I think that this a crucial question that deserves some deepening is for all of them, or you want to pick one? Okay.
Well, thank you. I want to say, first of all, I applaud both your courage in standing up and asking the first question, because that's not always easy. But also that you had a very cogent question, and I think this is exactly to the point. Regardless of what answer comes up, it's the right question. It's framed the right way, I think, as an outsider to ask is, what should our relationship with these other actors be? And you can break the European Union down and so on. Relationships between countries are not unlike relationships between people. There's some trade-off between the ease of obtaining that relationship and the desirability of obtaining that relationship. One of the things that's a debate in the US right now is, well, if the United States doesn't do X, then some other country will step in and take over. And sometimes that's a real issue. But I'm not sure that that's always as straightforward. If the United States doesn't pay as much attention to Japan as Japan would like, some people will say then China will take over that role. And having spent a fair amount of time in Japan, I can tell you there's no way that's going to happen, because the relationship between China and Japan is very difficult and awkward, right? So just because the relationship you want doesn't necessarily come knocking on your door, doesn't mean you can threaten to go with someone else. You have to convince the other party that in fact it's in their interest to have that relationship. And I think this is something that people around the world are a little rusty about, because in the first stage we had the Cold War and there were these overarching ideological structures because of bipolarity, where you either fit on one side or the other, or a few countries were off to the side. But most of the countries of Europe are going to sit in one place or another. So I would say, who do you want to have a relationship with, right? What is the, don't take a passive attitude in this. One of the things I've recognized in dealing with a big entity myself, I work with the US government, and for the most part, the US government couldn't care less about me, right? I am not a budget item in the US federal budget. So that's a liability, but it's also an opportunity. I can fit myself in lots of places. And a small country in a relationship with the US can do the same thing. You can make yourself a part of that relationship more easily than some big country. It's going to be a lot harder for Ukraine to convince the United States to make a big commitment to Ukraine, because it's a larger commitment than it would be for Albania. And one of the reasons, probably, frankly, that Albania got into NATO relatively early in this process was that no one in NATO thought it was going to be a big burden to increase the security cordon to include Albania. Right? Now, in the Baltics, this has been a bit of a wake-up call, because those are small countries that now look like a much larger security challenge than they did at the time. Okay? So this could change. But right now, I think that this is the kind of dynamic that's worth playing. And because you have multiple actors, you can play them off against each other. One of the things that all countries that are playing politics well do, unless they're very big and really can't play this game very well, is to play third parties off against each other. You mentioned a number of countries. Why not sound attractive to each one of them and impress upon the others that, hey, you know, there's a partner in this relationship?
Just a brief footnote. You posed the question like if these three big actors were part of a different house. That is true, but actually there is also NATO, where Turkey, European Union, part of European Union, US, are within the same military alliances. So this is actually a very important constraint that we should not forget. I think it becomes harder about the aspect of political coordination. So that, I think, is very important. And clearly, one of the aspects of Turkey is the foreign policy of Turkey and the possible tension with European Union and US. So in terms of military alliances, we have a clear framework. This framework, however, could also become an issue, because if there is an escalation of Turkey behavior, then this framework could be overstretched. So, of course, you would say, well, what's going to be the gain for Albania? I'm not sure if it's going to be a gain, but as Erik was saying, you know, actually the cost of these smaller powers could be higher if the NATO or the European Union decide to withdraw. So, again, don't portray it as three independent actors. Interdependence is crucial in politics. There is still a framework that is an international treaty. However, that framework is under pressure. And it's part of the international order instability we're seeing now.
So I would to add some few things, because more or less this question gets some answers. But coming to Albania, honestly, we have changed our traditional diplomacy and our framework and our agenda. And personal diplomacy has had more space than institutional diplomacy or traditional diplomacy. And led by our Prime Minister in his beginning of office, he started with, you remember maybe, he said that we are starting our relationship with a neighboring country with so-called zero problems with neighbors. This was the first mistake. The second was to replace some strategic partners and friends with the others. For example, Italy was replaced by Turkey, or the other friends or neighbors like Greece was replaced by Serbia, and also interfering the personal diplomacy in sensitive questions like the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia and giving them some ideas and avoiding our strategic partners, NATO, EU, and US. It was another big mistake. Also living, for example, another important state for Albania, like Vatican, without any ambassador since many years, is also another mistake. So changing the interests and changing the agenda in such little things have exposed the Albania sometimes in the wrong way, also according to the main partners and like US, EU, NATO. Sometimes we are trouble for NATO because China is interfering here and is coming here not only as investment, but look what was the US Embassy statement today. It was an early warning for 5G, which means that China, through the internet, is fighting in the internet war, or so-called, in the internet, you understand me what I'm meaning. So we have to fix our problems in our diplomacy and some priorities. We have to list our priorities and then to show and to fit them with our dedication, and not to make this mixture which sometimes have put it in trouble our friends, even Italy. And Ambassador Cutillo mentioned here a lot of contribution and dedication to Albania. What the question is, how many Italian companies are successfully working in Albania? How many wasn't before and how many are now? So we have to think about this.
Very shortly, I think a couple of small comments. There is no obstacles, of course, to develop good relations with all the countries you mentioned, no contradiction at all. Perhaps just it's good to remind that the US is very far away from the region. And I'm sorry to disappoint my Albanian friends. Albania is not strategic for the US. So sometimes there is a sort of illusion or delusion about this. So I think for the US, let's look at trade, for instance. Trade with the US is basically non-existent. There is nothing here which really interests the Americans. Turkey and Europe is a different story. We are just your neighbors, and I think Turkey has a long history, so it makes more sense that they invest more. As for Europe, the problem is probably that Europe is big. There are countries like Italy who know the importance of the relation with Albania because of geographic and historic links. Other parts of Europe are much less aware of that. So it is difficult in this time of crisis for Europe to devise a real unique policy toward Albania. But in the end, the relationship with the EU is the one which I would consider the most important, because it's the membership of the group which would be definitely, and I think this is the opinion of 90% of Albanians, the best possible next step for the country.
Excellent. We have 10 minutes left for the last question. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Bora. I'm a coordinator here in the course of medicine. And my question is maybe a bit historical question about the long-term impact or effect of the 1913 decisions to divide Albania, in the actual situation, political situation, so has the European countries' attitude changed or is different now regarding Albania and the actual situation? As we know, in 1913 we have been divided, and I want to know the European countries' attitude now regarding Albanian and Albanians.
Thank you. It's a question about fragmentation and years ago. Who wants to reply first?
Well, I'm not an expert in Albania. I don't know the extent of fragmentation you're talking about. So, but I study, for instance, legacies. So I study long-term legacies and what actually, how this can affect the policy making in a country and the perception of external actors of a country. So actually it's interesting to see how you can see division in Europe that have been persistent for centuries. So I cannot answer specifically to this, but I have to tell you that clearly there is something we call path dependency. So history is sticky. And also, Raul before was talking about emotion and perception. And there is a beautiful book by Roger Peterson about the intervention in the Balkans and how emotion from the interveners were extremely important to decide what to do or not to do. But also local actors use instrumentally these emotions. So, with Erik, of course, we talk always about constraints and incentives, but also the use of the past and the construction of the past. So proposing a narrative of what was the past can be extremely important to shape nowadays politics.
Very briefly, it's a really sensitive question and needs more time to explain. But I wanted to keep together 1913 and 1919 because these two periods of times they have affected the Albanian borders, and we have these borders now and we have this new reality now. But I wanted to add that Italy at this time had played a key role for the stability of Albania after 1912, 1913 up to 1919. And it was fixed that Italy is in charge for the stability of Albania in any case of destabilization of this country. And it was really engaged to help Albania to be a modern country. Even this was surrounded by a lot of skeptics and enemies from this period of time.
I can only thank you for your remark. No, I'm interested in listening to your question because the concept of dividing Albanians is not what we feel from outside. I mean, it was a matter of drawing borders, and we know that it's always a difficult exercise. And there was no former Albania to divide. Albania as a political entity did not exist before 1912. So it was only an historic or language, let's say, connection among people who were living in different regions of the Ottoman Empire. So the exercise of drawing the border was, of course, a political exercise, and it led to a result which, in Albanian perspective, is negative, but I can assure you the same things the same impression is shared by all neighbors of Albania who believe they lost part of their own territory to the advantage of Albania. So it's a matter where really there is no one solution fair or more fair than others. But I think it's a political matter, and it was decided according to the different political forces at play at that time.
So, as an outsider, I cannot speak to the issue of division, but it reminds me of maybe a sort of broader point, which is that small states have a generic set of problems. There's two states of the world, two conditions that they're going to confront, and both have their problems, their challenges. One is that outsiders can take an interest and meddle and treat you as pawns in their bigger game of world chess. And the other is they can lose interest and ignore you when you need help. There is not good science on this. There's not good scholarship. It hasn't been thought through because most of the resources and investment that's been made in understanding world affairs has been made at the top. Okay? The people in this room, especially the young ones, this is a charge to you. This is an opportunity and also important for your country and for other smaller states, which outnumber the bigger states, of course, right? Invest in this. Learn how these processes work and use that to build a more successful society. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can heavily clap hands to our guests again. For I think this has been, in spite of the rain, a very successful meeting. Just 1 minute to remind you the next meetings of CESPIC. On November 26th, we have a meeting about economic sustainability in line with Pope Francis Laudato Si and the worldwide trend. On January, we'll have January 23, a meeting on inequality and the impact of societal conflicts. On February 3rd, we'll have a meeting on arborish minority and the contribution given to culture. Thanks a lot for being here one more time. On that table, you'll find some information about CESPIC, about our university in general, and we hope to see you again. Remind, this meeting will be on YouTube in the next weeks. Thanks a lot. Good night.